Greetings. I would like to take a little bit of time to introduce you to this journey, to intimately know different components of why we're here and what my orientation or intention is in walking you through this profound experience. And I think that that necessitates that one, we understand why we do the descent, like what's behind it. I mean, getting to know Venus, making this declaration that I want to know Venus necessitates that we will visit the underworld. And I think that it is really helpful to kind of have a sense of what we're getting into when we make a declaration like that in our lives, because this is a journey that results in a lot of power. Um, but it's also a journey that takes a lot of heart to meet at the same time. So I want to begin by talking about the name of this journey, why I named it SkyDancer. And I'll tell you one, because Venus makes this gorgeous mandala rose pattern in the sky as she travels through the night. And for me, it looks like a sky dancer. But the name sky dancer actually derives from the Dakini. I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but it's a form of feminine fierceness in Buddhism. And so I had read these words by Lama Alion. She writes a book called Wisdom Rising, and in it she says, the Dakini is a messenger of spaciousness and a force of truth, presiding over the funeral of self-deception. Wherever we cling, she cuts. Whatever we think we can hide from, even from ourselves, she reveals. The Dakini traditionally appears during transitions, moments between worlds, between life and death, in visions between sleeping and waking, in cemeteries and on charnel grounds. And as we go into the story of Inanna, you'll hear some very keen similarities between the Dakini and Inanna. But what really struck me about these words were the Dakini presides over the funeral of self-deception. And I'll tell you, to become a Venus woman, to become aligned with Venus, to journey with Venus necessitates a lot of self-reflection and honesty, and really being in a deep relationship to what's true. And it necessitates that we look at the places that we park our energy in fantasy and romanticism. And it doesn't mean that fantasy and romanticism aren't part of magic, because they are. We'll find as we dive deeper into this journey that the ground of the goddess is paradox. So there is this necessity to be in a deep relationship to the isness of life. One of Venus's components is the capacity to meet and attune herself to her environment. And so this capacity to be with what's arising in the moment is a Venusian quality. And so there's this kind of spectrum that we need to be able to move through between the romantic fantasy. And I don't even mean romantic like a lovership. I mean, we romanticize, how a job interview will go or how a vacation will go. We fantasize a lot. And I know for me that I found that some of my greatest pains and traumas came from parking a lot of energy and life force in fantasies that didn't work out the way that I thought they would. And so there is this idea, as we are in SkyDancer, that this Dakini travels with us, presiding over the funeral, our own funeral of self-deception, and that we come into a relationship of deep honesty with ourselves, and we get in relationship with our truth, with the truth, in a way that we haven't before, where we prioritize the truth and our relationship to it kind of above anything else, because it's following this thread of truth day after day, moment after moment, that informs all of the choices that we make. And so, with that said, I thought that then I'd move into talking just a little bit about descent. And there's a book that I've been inspired with and enamored by since I went on a descent journey years and years ago. It was recommended to me by someone in the young community. I do a lot of work with Jungian analysts, and I'm in groups that kind of like to talk about emerging archetypes. And one of the archetypes that was emerging just 10 years ago, it doesn't seem like it's an emergent archetype, but for most of the general population, it is. And I'm talking about the goddess. And so she had recommended this book to me by Sylvia Brinton Pereira called Descent of the Goddess. And I mean, I've read this thing cover to cover, back to front. I've earmarked pages, underlined passages. It has been like a North Star for me. And it really is sort of the foundation of this work. I've gone on to really add a lot of my own flavors to it based on my own experiences. However, I think that I really like to credit her work, and she does a really good job of distilling the process where I might go on. I have Venus conjunct Mercury, and Mercury for me is in Sagittarius, while Venus is in Scorpio. So it's an out of sign conjunction. And Mercury being in Jupiter's house means that I can talk a lot about a lot of things. It's sorry, Mercury being, did I say in Jupiter's house? Jupiter expands stuff. So I can talk a lot. I can add a lot of flowery language to what I'm saying. So I want to use Sylvia's words here just to kind of hit the point quickly. So she says the process of initiation in the esoteric and mystical traditions dating back a millennia is inspired by Venus. It involves exploring different models of consciousness and rediscovering the experience of unity with nature and the cosmos that is inevitably lost through our goal-oriented style of development in the West, meaning the way we develop as children, like our essential development codes in the West are very goal-oriented. And so we miss this kind of connection with nature and the cosmos in our natural development in our society. She says it forces us out of our affect-laden society and into the liminal dimension of magic and spontaneous creation. And what she means by affect laden is essentially that we all kind of put on a mask or specific affect. I know that we add an affect when we talk to people a lot of the times. You know, we want to put like a veneer of kindness over our speech or niceness so that we get what we want. And so she's kind of pointing to this, that it forces us out of our affect-laden society and then into the liminal dimension of magic and spontaneous creation, to the archaic depths that are embodied, ecstatic, and transformative. The descent journey takes us there. They are pre-verbal and often pre-archetypal. They're capable of taking us over and shaking us to the core. And in these depths, we are given a sense of the one cosmic power. And there we are moved and taught through an intensity of our own affects, that there is indeed a living balance process. This is what we're initiated into on our journey through the descent gateways, the gateways of surrender, and into the underworld. Our conscious ego is overrun by passion and numinous images. And though shaken and perhaps even destroyed, we're recoalesced into new patterns and spewed back out into ordinary life. Connecting to these levels of consciousness involves a sacrifice of the upper world aspects of the self and for the sake of the dark. It means a sacrifice to and for the repressed, undifferentiated ground of being with the hope of gaining rebirth with a deeper and more resonant awareness. And it means then returning to the upper world with those resonances and adding them to the mental, cerebral, ordinary Western consciousness in order to forge integral consciousness, or rather, in today's terms, we could say to raise, quote unquote, raise the consciousness of the planet and transform the world we live in. So essentially what we're doing is going to the underworld, having this transformative experience that really kind of like shatters all the identities and crystallizations that we have masked or armored and shielded ourselves in. All of our protection mechanisms fail in this place. And then when we emerge on the ascent side of the journey, essentially we emerge with a new consciousness, one that's much more clear, aligned with the truth, aligned with the essence of who we really are. And it's at that point we're really ready to serve. We also often leave the underworld experience with our medicine. Like that's where our medicine is forged. And then we add our newfound consciousness from going on this journey to the consciousness of the rest of the collective. And it is through, multitudes of people taking this journey and coming out with this new rarefied consciousness that we are able to help transform the consciousness and raise the level of awareness on the earth. So, another way of saying that is we are contributing to the evolution of the planet. So from this perspective, the story of Inanna's descent is the revelation of an initiation ritual. And it is directly relevant to the feminine experience today. And you'll hear me at different times talk about the initiation rites of the Eleusinian mysteries, the Temple of Isis. Of course, there's Inanna's is the first recorded descent journey. The Mithrian people, Jesus, and Jesus was called He of the Morning Star. I mean, this has been a template for initiation for millennia. This is not actually new or revelatory. It's new in the sense that we don't practice this ourselves in Christianity. Essentially, what they said was Jesus is the last person that needs to do this. And it put us on a supernal path, like only an ascent trajectory, and really erased the dark from our experience and didn't give us access to the corridors or the full labyrinth of being human. I mean, all we were doing then is living a moral and virtuous life and expecting to be handed the keys to the heavens while turning our back on the dark. And that is not a template for a psychologically whole being. And so to actually realign our life to the thrum of truth that resonates within us, it often necessitates this kind of death-defying act of surrendering ourselves to the dark. And it can be a fear-inducing or even death-defying act to let go this deeply, to give ourselves permission to change our orientation from one of resistance to one of kind of complete surrender. They're two different yoga poses in a sense, and we'll talk about that on our journey. And so now that I've prefaced and began with the descent, I think it's important to introduce you to who Inanna is. When we say that this is a template for psychological wholeness, well, who is Inanna and how does she hold that? So I'm going to talk a little bit about who Inanna is and give really a really deep, one of the deepest, I think, and most fulsome explanations you'll find anywhere. So in the Sumerian poem, Inanna decides to go to the underworld. They say she sets her heart from the highest heaven on earth's deepest ground. And then she abandons heaven, abandons earth to go to the netherworld. And as a precaution, she instructs her maidservant Ninshabar to appeal to the father of the gods to help in securing her release if she does not return within 3 days. At the first gate of the netherworld, Inanna is stopped and asked to declare herself. And the gatekeeper informs Erishkigal, queen of the great below, that Inanna, queen of heaven, Oh, sorry, Inanna, queen of heaven, the queen of the place where the sun rises, asks for admission to the land of no return to witness the funeral of Golagana, who is the husband of Ereshkigal. And Ereshkigal becomes furious and insists that the upper world goddess be treated according to the laws and rights for anyone entering her kingdom, and that she be brought naked and bowed low. And so essentially what this means is like these gates that she goes through are gates of surrender. She is asked to surrender who she is completely, give up every single false vestment of power that she has to make this extraordinary journey. And when we think of false vestments of power, essentially we can think of like, you know, things like our identities that we're highly invested in, our job, our money, all of the weird quirks we have around safety, certainty, security, comfort, all of those kind of the ones that are not true. You know, the Dakini presides over the funeral of those things so that we can be more aligned and more in truth. And so who is Inanna? The goddess Inanna, which is her Babylonian name, her Semitic name is Ishtar, provides a many-faceted symbolic image of a wholeness pattern, of the feminine beyond the merely maternal. Other goddesses in Sumer were great sea and earth mothers. And while Inanna takes the double axe symbol of the ancient goddess into her cult, she combines earth and sky, matter and spirit, vessel and life, earthly bounty and heavenly guidance. And this is kind of where we get the human and divine piece that is so prevalent on the Magdalene path. These are all goddesses of the rose lineage. They are connected to Venus. She had perhaps originally to do with grain and the communal storehouse as vessel, the container of dates, grain, and livestock. And among her oldest emblems were this storehouse and looped cloth or bundle, perhaps reeds as the closure to her storehouse. She thus, like Demeter and Caradwin, a Newman of personal fertility. So there's this kind of like generic fertility that is first associated with Inanna. She's also from the beginning a goddess of the heavens, marked on ancient seals and vases as a star. And we'll see that 8-pointed star as we go along. So as the goddess of the sky, gentle rains and terrible storms and floods, and of the overcast sky, the clouds, which were called her breast, she is called the Queen of Heaven and said to be the spouse of An. And we'll see there's an association with the Queen of Heaven in that Mother Mary is called Stella Maris. So as the spouse of An, the ancient heaven god, she's also from an early time the goddess of the radiant, erratic morning and evening star. So here we find the first mention of Venus, awakening life and setting it to rest, ruling the borderlands, ushering in and out her brother, the sun god, and her father, the moon god. And here we have the first mention of the Venus cycle and the planets that are part of this epic journey. She represents the liminal intermediate regions and the energies that cannot be contained or made certain and secure. She is not the feminine as night, like many of the lunar cults had the goddess, but rather she symbolizes the consciousness of the transition and border places and of intersection and crossing over that imply creativity and change and all the joys and doubts that go with human consciousness, that is flexible, playful, and never certain for long. And here we can hear this association with the dynamic feminine. And we can also hear this association with the kind of like maiden-like feminine. So as the evening star, she holds court at the time of the new moon to hear the gods' petitions and to be celebrated with music, feasting, and staged bloody battles. She claimed the me, which we know about. That's part of what she did when she went to the underworld. And the me are the ordering principles, potencies, talents, and rights of the civilized upper world. And as the judge, she holds court to decree fate and to trample the obedient, symbolizing the feeling capacity to evaluate periodically and afresh that which goes with the sense of life's changing processes. So, as queen of the land and its fertility, she bestows kingship on the mortal chosen to be shepherd of the people. Here we hear this reference, shepherd of the people, which is very similar to that of Jesus. And we also hear this kind of ancient phenomenon of the temple priestess or the sacred prostitute. And she welcomes him to her bed and her throne, which is made of the world tree that Gilgamesh cut down for her from her garden. And to her consort, she gives the throne, the scepter, the staff, the crook, and the crown, as well as the promise of good harvest and the joys of her bed. And there's also sort of a nod in that kind of writing to the Temple of Solomon and to the erotic mysteries. But Inanna is also the goddess of war. Battle is the dance of Inanna, and giving victory, she is the quiver ready at hand and the heart of battle and the arm of the warriors. More passionate than Athena, with the energies of wild instinct, which were later in Greece assigned to Artemis, she is described in one hymn as all-devouring in power, attacking like the storm, having an awesome face and an angry heart, and she sings with abandoned delight of her own glory and prowess. Heaven is mine, earth is mine, I, warrior am I. Is there a god who can vie with me? The gods are sparrows, I am a falcon. The Anunnaki, which are gods, trundle along. I am a splendid wild crow. And in one myth, she's described as battling the dragon of the Kur and slaying it. And the Kur is the underworld. Her companion animal is the lion, and 7 of them pull her in the chariot. And there's so much symbolism just in this passage alone. So we notice the lion, which is related to Leo. There is this sense where she talks about heaven and earth are hers, and she's a warrior. And this poem is actually, I went and looked, written prior to her descent to the underworld. So this is who Inanna is before she travels to the underworld. And so when we see her as morning star, she's in her warrioress emanation. This is when, like I said, the Maya use the appearance of the morning star as an opportunity to declare war, because the energy of the morning star is imminent. It's emergent. It's warrior-like. It can be bloodthirsty and rageful. And so this passage here and the little bits of the poetry that they're pulling from the cuneiform text was actually cited before she goes to the underworld. So we can see this real beautiful marriage of heaven and earth with Inanna. So these are the upper world characteristics. And then eventually when she does go to the underworld, we see that template of wholeness, like that spirit married to the deep human. So equally passionate, she is a goddess of sexual love. She sings ecstatic songs of self-abandonment and desire of her delights of lovemaking. And she calls to her beloved consort, her honeyman, who sweetens me ever, inviting him to her holy lap to savor her life-giving caresses and the sweetness of her sex with her on the sacred marriage bed. More extroverted than Aphrodite, she craves and takes desires and destroys and then grieves and composes grief songs. She does not as often arouse desire from within, but claims her need assertively and celebrates her body in song. And her receptivity is active, which is another nod to kind of the dynamic feminine. And she calls out to have her body filled, singing praises to her vulva and bidding Dumuzi to come to her bed, plow my vulva, man of heart. She is thus a goddess of courtesans, called a harlot, hailing men from the alehouse. And as she rises as hailing men from the alehouse, and in heaven she is called the bridesmaid and the hieroladule of the gods. She is also a healer, a life giver, a composer of songs to which she is said to give birth. She is creative in every realm, and the behavior of the emotions is considered to be in her keeping. So, behavior of the emotions is considered to be in the domain of Inanna, aka Venus. There are many poems about her that portray her as loving, jealous, grieving, joyful, timid, exhibitionist, thieving, passionate, ambitious, generous, and so on. The whole range of affects of the goddess. And what we really get from this is sort of like permission to be fully human. Like when we are embodying Venus, we are embodying the full range or full spectrum of our humanity. Often, Inanna is often described as the daughter of the gods and a maid. And so we heard up here that she's a harlot. So she embodies that kind of like virgin harlot split in the sense that there is no split, right? She just embodies it. It's not a psychic split within her. So many of us carry this wound that we'll look at in the sacral chakra of the virgin horse split, but Inanna does not have that. And indeed, by the time of the later hymns, that were written to her, she, like Athena, is often seen as conditioned by the bondedness to the father. And although poems suggest a close and joyful personal relationship to her own mother, she has that kind of like patriarchal bond with her father. And though she has two sons and the kings of and people of Sumer are called her progeny, she is not motherly like in our use of the term. Like the goddess Artemis, she is at the border region, midway between motherhood and maidenhood. She's got this kind of exuberant enjoyment as part of her template and a lust for murder, fecundity, and animality. And that's sort of, where Lilith comes in, our Black Moon Lilith. She is a quintessentially positive Puella, an eternally youthful, dynamic, fierce, sensual harlot virgin. She is one in herself. She is never a settled and domestic wife nor mother under the patriarchy. She keeps her independence and magnetism as lover, as young bride, and as widow. And she is not a mother lover to sons. In spite of her power as goddess of fertility, order, war, love, the heavens, healing, emotions, and song, in spite of having the titles lady of a myriad of offices and queen, Inanna is a wanderer. And like Ereshkigal, she was deposed by Enlil in the second generation of the sky gods, and her roots lie deep in the pre-patriarchal stratum. But from the perspective of the patriarchy, with Gilgamesh as its spokesperson, meaning that Gilgamesh is the writer of some of these texts, Inanna Ishtar is fickle and unreliable and the certain cause of grief to her beloved consort. So thus, Gilgamesh, who originally lent her his human strength to build the bed and the throne of kingship, he later turns against her and denigrates and insults the goddess of the land in order to lay claim to her power, which, hello, I mean, what is this kind of what does this evoke for us? It's like evoking the arc of history. In one plaintive song in Inanna's laments to Enlil, the loss of her house, she says, "Me, the woman, he has filled with dismay." And so, just so you know, a lot of Inanna's personal hymns are written by one of her priestesses called Adhuana. And so there are times that we're hearing about the history of Sumar and even Inanna through the words of Gilgamesh. And then there are other times that we're hearing the poetry of Inanna, or Adhuana, who was Inanna's scribe and priestess. So Inanna says here, "Me, the woman he has filled with dismay. He filled me, the queen of heaven, with consternation. I, the woman who circles the land, tell me where my house is. Tell me where the city in which I may live. I, who am your daughter, the Herodule, who am who am your bridesmaid. Tell me, where is my house? The bird has its nesting place, but my young are dispersed. The fish lies in calm waters, but my resting place does not exist. The dog kneels at the threshold, but I have no threshold. And this song may have been written to lament some calamity to her main temple in Erech. But beyond that, this is perhaps the oldest known and very poignant statement of the condition of the goddess and woman as exile. And like the later Babylonian wives of Israel sent away from their homes by the patriarchy, even the great pre-Babylonian goddess knows and sings of expulsion. So, in fact, the search for a home is one of the recurrent dream themes in the initial analytical work of modern women and daughters of the patriarchy. So, indeed, much of what Inanna symbolized for the Sumerians has since been exiled, just like much of what the feminine in general has symbolized for millennia has been exiled. And most of the qualities held by the upper world goddess have been desacralized in the West or taken over by masculine divinities. And or they have been overly compressed or overly idealized by the patriarchal moral and aesthetic codes. So thus, most of the Greek goddesses were swallowed up by their fathers. The Hebrew goddesses were depotentiated, meaning they were demoted. And most of the powers once held by the goddess have lost their connection to a woman's life. The embodied, playful, passionately erotic feminine, the powerful, independent, self-willed feminine, and the ambiguous, regal, many-sided feminine. And so, here we consider that going on this journey, this deep journey with Venus and Inanna, is a reclamation, a true reclamation of all of those things. Now, as somebody who has been doing this work since 2012, deeply since 2015, I will let you know that work with the feminine is slow. It's meant to be slow. We descend over a period of many months, and then we go into the underworld and we do this kind of deep unthreading. And then we come up the other side because we need to sort of have this break. And I've always thought that it's just so beautiful how there's like an intelligence in Venus's cycle in this way, that there are these constant cycles of creation, death, and then kind of a recoalescing to be born again. And so instead of it being this like dramatic, sudden severing and drag to the underworld that unexpected or unconscious underworld experiences are, like things that happen out of the blue that we're so unprepared for, right? I had an experience like that in 2012, and you'll hear me talk about it at different points. I'm not going to talk about it now. When we do conscious descent work, what we're doing is lovingly, gently taking apart, shearing off what isn't true, aligning more to what is true, and having the work done a little bit more gently. I mean, there are times that we'll go through a gate of surrender and we will have big feelings come up, or we'll have grief arise. And the grief is such a life-giving reconnection to vitality. I can't even tell you. So part of another thing that we'll be doing here is really looking at, what our orientation or yoga pose is when grief arises, so that we can be reconnected to the living eros inside of grief, into the vitality inside of grief. But like just knowing consciously how to hold ourselves through a descent journey, and how to align ourselves with a life that is truly true, a life that we incarnated to have, is just such a paradigm shifting, empowering thing. Like there is a ruthless compassion in the underworld, but it is always meant to be an empowerment. Like when we look at the deities of Mars and Pluto, Mars's sense of power is the power of the dominator culture. There's this power over dynamic, and which we need that sometimes. I don't ever want to denigrate the masculine or the things that we need. When a baby is, potentially going to be hit by a car, we need to be able to overpower in that situation. So, I mean, these are important energetics for the planet. And then you've got Pluto, who's another planet that represents personal power, but his power is the power that's forged in the dark. It's that power that comes when you have nothing left to lose, when there's just it's you nose to nose with the underworld, naked and bowed low. There is such an empowerment that happens in that place. And it is like the deepest, most alchemical crucible that we can be in terms of deriving power for ourselves. So I've spoken for quite a while. I want to close this out now. And I feel like I've said most of what I wanted to say. I can talk about this, I swear, for hours. So instead of doing that, if I find that I've got more to say, I will make another transmission. Thank you so much for listening. This has been wonderful. Love to you all.